Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic hypersonic.
Positronic hypersonic.
Positronic hypersonic.
I'm Barry P. Cook, and I'm here to talk to you about the latest episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. It was called What is Starfleet? And as the episode starts, a voiceover introduces a documentary by Humberto Ortegas, who of course is Lieutenant Ortegas' brother, which questions the nature of Starfleet and the Federation, and whether they're an exploratory and peacekeeping outfit versus an outfit or outfits bent on empire. Enterprise is then sent on a mission to tow a creature called the Jikaru from one planet to another via tractor beam to help one side in a war between two planets. And it soon proves more complicated than expected when the creature is tractor beam resistant and very powerful, and clearly intended to be used as a weapon, and Enterprise is ordered to capture it, which also presents at least one moral dilemma, as well as a danger to Enterprise and nearby worlds. Spock realizes he can probably communicate with the creature, and he convinces the captain to allow him to approach it in a shuttle and attempt communication, but when a Lutani ship, a ship from one of the sides in the war, approaches the creature, it becomes upset and releases radiation which injures the shuttle crew. It comes to light that the creature's brain chemistry has been altered, presumably by the Lutani, to force it to focus on death and destruction, essentially becoming a weapon, much to its own harm. So Uhura volunteers to Neuralink with the Jikaru since Spock is injured, so as to communicate with it, and she learns that it wants to die because it's tired of being a weapon. Since the Doctor informs everyone that its brain chemistry cannot be set right, Pike decides to honor the creature's wishes, and Enterprise leads it to the nearby sun to destroy it. And Pike promises to see to it that its offspring remain unaltered. After all of this, Uhura talks with Humberto, and it turns out that he approached the making of the documentary with an axe to grind against Starfleet, and to paint it negatively, as he blames it for luring his sister away and for almost getting her killed, which happened during the conflict with the Gorn. Enterprise successfully lures the Jikaru to the sun, and it destroys itself, but not before a Lutani ship threatens aggression against Enterprise if it destroys their project, which Pike successfully warns them against. Humberto closes the documentary with footage of the crew engaging in positive activities and a voiceover that paints Starfleet and the Federation in a positive light. And that's where the episode ended. So, unfortunately, I have to say that I didn't like this episode. I think it's probably the weakest episode they've ever done. It's definitely the weakest episode of the season. First of all, it left me with a couple of questions. How did the Lutani alter the Jikaru? We don't know. Why couldn't the Jikaru fly to the sun on its own or let Enterprise blow it up? Why did they have to lead it to a sun? That doesn't make sense to me. At one point in the episode, La'an, during one of her candid interviews for the documentary, says that sometimes Starfleet shoots first. And I don't think that's true. They normally don't shoot first. So I don't know what she's talking about. During the documentary, Spock is interviewed and he says that Starfleet has allowed him to explore his human half, that he wouldn't have been able to do that on Vulcan because he would have been hugely ostracized. And that's great, except Spock would never, ever talk about that in a documentary. He would never, ever talk about that on the record. In his personal logs, yes. To a friend, yes. In a documentary that might be seen anywhere in the Federation, no. He never, ever would have said that. So that was very annoying. But the worst thing about this episode, those are little nitpicks. The worst thing about this episode is the overall story. And I say that because why would the Federation help one side in a war? The official reason is classified, so the characters don't even know. But as an audience member, I have to ask the question, and the answer is it wouldn't. If asked by one side in a war to support it against the other side, even when that side is getting hammered, as was the case in this story, the Federation would instead offer to step in and help achieve a ceasefire from which a lasting peace could be negotiated. It would send a large peacekeeping force to the underdog in the situation that was being massively outgunned by the other side and massively decimated by the other side, and defend it from attack while requiring them to no longer attack against the other side while trying to achieve a peace deal, and would only use force while necessary while trying to achieve that goal. It would not facilitate the arming of one side. It would not do that. Even when Starfleet picked a side in a conflict, as depicted in Star Trek Insurrection, it was depicted as that not being consistent with what Starfleet does. And when Captain Picard discovered that Starfleet was essentially choosing sides and favoring one side in a non-military conflict over the other side, and that it was harming that other side, he went rogue and remedied the situation, and the admiral who had done it was brought to heel. Because Starfleet doesn't do that. The Federation doesn't do that. It doesn't pick winners and losers or make one side the loser unless peace is inachievable because the one side will not give up and they insist on war, in which case Starfleet would defend. So I just found the whole premise of the episode to be bullshit. And, feel free in the comments to correct me if I'm wrong. I know Starfleet was involved in the Dominion War, and I know that got dicey, but even in the conflict with the Bajor and the Cardassians, it didn't take sides. I mean, it considered the Cardassians an enemy, and it protected Bajor, but it didn't engage in open conflict with Cardassia. So this episode just baffles me why this episode got written. If they had instead made this story about what Starfleet actually would have done in this situation, that would have been a much better episode because it would have depicted what Starfleet and the Federation are about much better than this scenario where, how did it treat this one creature? The scenario in this episode kind of scratches the surface of the kind of moral dilemma that Starfleet often faces and how they behave when those things happen, whereas a full exploration of the conflict in process, which would have occurred if they depicted the Federation trying to navigate that situation and bring about a peaceful resolution, would have done that much better. I mean, at the same time, it would have been kind of showing us something that Star Trek has shown us before, because certainly they've depicted Starfleet negotiating peace between warring factions or warring worlds. But I think I would have preferred a little bit of ground retreading to what they showed us. And that's in no small part because it would have exposed us somewhat, at least, to the culture of these two species, the Lutani and the Kesar, that they introduced, only one of which they even showed us. And, personally, I don't think you can explore the issue of what it is that brings societies to war and into what it is that ultimately makes societies decide to bring an end to war often enough. That's the kind of thing that humanity at large needs constant reminders of. And if we have to achieve that in part by every once in a while having an episode of a TV show that tells a story like what I'm suggesting, and we see it time and time again over time, then that's what we have to do. What's wrong with that? That's what Star Trek should do. And that's a big part of why it exists and why people have loved it, because it does that. And, to be fair, I think the heart of the writers and producers was in the right place here. So I can't knock them completely, but they totally took the easy route by sniffing around the surface of a very narrow moral issue where they could have done so much more and explored the human condition so much more and just had a much more poignant episode. Instead, what they gave us a retread of was essentially Encounter at Farpoint, the very first episode of TNG. And I don't think that was worthwhile at this point. This episode had the barest bones of what a Star Trek episode should be about. And that's just a disappointment. It really is. Everything looked great. The production values are through the roof. It looked great. The performances were great. But they did a few dumb things, like I pointed out a few minutes ago. And they totally missed the boat in terms of producing an episode of television that means something and says something. And it's really unfortunate because I think this show has good moments. It certainly has good episodes, but this wasn't it. This episode was weak sauce. It was, like I said, I think the weakest episode they've produced. I could be wrong. I can't remember thinking a previous episode was as weak as this or weaker than this. There might have been one or two, but to my memory at present, this is the weakest episode they've produced out of 27. Definitely the weakest episode of the season. And there are only 3 more left in the season. And we know one of them is going to be stupid already. The one where they turn them into Vulcans with like a magic trick, basically. I'm girding myself mentally for that one. I don't know if it's this coming week or one of the following 2 weeks, but oh man, not looking forward to it because I already know it's going to bug the crap out of me. So that's really it. I mean, I know I haven't talked much about this episode, but I don't think there's much else you can say. I think it was bad and it could have been so much better. And that's what's sad about it. So I'm going to get out of here, but I'll be back with another video soon. Until I return, I wish you peace and long life.